to talk about some hints and tips for successful conversations in the workplace. In the workplace, we often face situations where there's a lot of pressure. It can be quite tense. There's demands from the stakeholder. We're under scrutiny. There's deadlines to meet. So it can be a tense atmosphere, and it's important that we get our communication right and correct in those moments, so there's no misunderstandings or no issues created. In essence, there tends to be four types of communication. The first is the passive communication, those people who are actually emotionally dishonest, in that they don't actually challenge back. They're indirect, they might be too apologetic. It's not really revealing what their true thoughts are. So passive may avoid the debate and the argument, but it's actually emotionally dishonest and probably not doing us any favors, or you as an individual any favors, in the longer term. Then there's the passive aggressive people, and we've all come across those people who will self enhance at the expense of others, or drop someone in it so it deflects from something they've done. That passive aggressive approach, it's also emotionally dishonest because it's deflecting from their own involvement and their own participation in the communication. Then got the aggressive people who are the inappropriately honest end of the spectrum, too extreme in their honesty. They're very direct, they're expressive, but as a result, it often is or can lean towards being attacking or blaming or controlling. So aggressive, you know where you stand, you know what they're thinking, but it's not the right approach. So inappropriately honest. So where do we want to be? We want to be in the very end situation of, we want to be assertive, appropriately honest. So direct, and it will be self-enhancing. It will be expressive and self-confident, but it's also empathetic to the emotions and the viewpoints, and where others are coming from with their view. So we want to move into the assertive end of our communication. So what's some of the psychology behind conversation outcomes? Well, essentially, there's only one in the workplace where it's considered a true win, and that's the resolution outcome, where both parties on either side of the discussion come away feeling they've got something from it that's positive for them. If you get your result, but the other person doesn't get anything of what they've won, you've won, but in essence, you're a bully. And I don't mean bully in the truest sense of the word, but you're the victor and they're the loser in the situation. So psychologically, they don't feel great that you've got your outcome, but they've got nothing from it. If you avoid the situation, difficult conversation to be had, I don't want to do it, I don't like those conversations, I'm just not going to do it, it'll be all right. Well, then you've become the victim in the situation. Simply, if you go in with a certain result and aim being looked for, but you just give in, again, you're the victim, you've lost. And if you persuade, but you've not persuade in a way that influences and engage and gets someone on board, that persuasion but not really successful persuasion. Again, you're the victor. They've lost. Psychologically, they're not going to feel good about it. So the only true psychological win is when there's a resolution that both parties come away happy with. And you see this obviously in consultations, certainly when there's management and union reps or representations on behalf of the workforce. The win is when both parties walk away with something they can live with, as it were. So summing that up, there's the me, there's the you, there's the if I've won and you've won, brilliant. It's green light all round. Everyone's a winner. It's all good. If you've won, they've lost. That's how they're feeling. If you have not tackled it, or you've given in, you've lost. But they've won because they're carrying on as they are, and they got their victory. If neither of you have reached an agreement, then obviously you've both lost. So with having discussions with stakeholders or team members, it's important that we have clarity, ownership, and empowerment. So what do we mean by that? There needs to be a clear desired result. There needs to be guidelines, resources, accountabilities, and then there's also what are the outcomes. So if we look at that in more detail, if you're talking with a stakeholder, a team member, that you need them to take ownership of action and do something, you've got to clarify with the person what you want. You've then got to explain or agree what needs to be done, but the person owns it. If you're asking someone to do it, you don't want to take over and deal with it. They own it. It's their responsibility. But what tools does the individual need for the job? If you're asking them to do a particular job, do they need certain systems, certain tools, certain processes that they need to follow? Do you need extra help? So what tools they need for success? Then there's the accountability. The person who is responsible for the activity, the job holder, the action owner, they agree those actions, they agree the timescales and the deadlines and so on and so forth. And then there are outcomes, there are consequences in essence. What will happen if the requirements aren't met? Now that may be something quite small, but it could be something quite significant. And this isn't to blame, it's just to make sure that everyone knows what we need to do and why and what will happen if it doesn't get done, because that could impact on other things later on. So I've talked about this in other sessions as well, but SMART goals, probably a lot of you have come across the acronym SMART before, but setting those objectives, is it specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound? Set that statement out there, then it's very clear of what needs to be done, who owns it, and how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it by, and so on and so forth. Example of a historical SMART goal, one I quote often in these sort of sessions, JFK 1962, we will put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him safely. Very smart, and it's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable and realistic. Depending on where you stand on conspiracy theories as to whether we really landed on the moon, as to how realistic it truly is. It's relevant and it's time bound. We will do it by the end of the decade. Does it align to those higher goals? In this piece, with it being relevant, it was relevant to the USA wanting to be the successful superpower in the Cold War. They needed to get to the moon before the Russians, so that was a big part of the relevance of having that objective in play. So often in the workplace, we'll be needing to give feedback, and you've got some examples in the box there of various types of feedback, but just going into a little bit more detail, there is feedback where it's showing your appreciation, but be specific, make it meaningful. So make it known that you're specifically grateful for this piece of work. Guidance, you can combine that with appreciation for optimum results, but often feedback is given in the forms of guidance of try doing this and then try doing that, see how you get on. Encouragement always gives an extra boost. Quick exchanges typically. Forward-looking feedback is always more positive than looking backwards feedback. If we're looking back, it can fixate on the mistake if things didn't go to plan, whereas forward-looking gives context and a goal to work for. And what I mean by that, if we look back, it's and things haven't gone successfully, it's well, why didn't that work? Why didn't that? It can come across a bit too much blameworthy. Whereas looking forward, next time I think we need to do this, can you try doing it this way for me? How do you feel about that? Is much more positive. It's recognizing that something's gone wrong, but it's not fixating on it didn't go right and why was that. Coaching, usually included in regular reviews, but can be combined with other feedback. Informal feedback, obviously very spontaneous. Formal feedback tends to be in those job evaluations, formal reviews, and more detailed. And obviously there is negative feedback, but ideally avoid this, because if you're picking fault on mistakes and shortcomings, then people are going to start feeling belittled. They'll be demotivated, they'd be resentful. So harping back to that forward-looking feedback is always much better, because it moves away from something that could, looking backwards, could easily veer into negative feedback. So some feedback, hints and tips. I'm sure this is stating the obvious to everyone that's listening and watching this, but do be specific, don't generalize, do actively listen and ask those clarifying questions and maintain that professional stance throughout. If you are giving feedback about something that's not gone so well, asking those clarification questions might actually bring forth some actual reasons that you didn't realize that impacted on the person's ability to deliver. So it could be that they didn't have the level of resource they needed, the tools they needed, and you weren't aware of that. So it makes the listening carefully to what people are saying, clarifying questions to check your understanding, can show things in a new emphasis, new perspective, and a new light. And don't forget, feedback always works in two ways. So do ask for return feedback. I know it's difficult if your boss says, "And how do you think I'm doing?" But have that two-way feedback. So in meetings, again, probably goes without saying, but if you're doing a formal meeting, prepare for the meeting, clarify what it's about, review objectives, gather input, check you're not being biased, and so on and so forth. Set the tone for the meeting. If it's something that you discuss one-on-one, have that neutral setting, that private venue. Always have that level of respect. You want a psychologically safe environment and a clear structure, so it aligns with the goals. You can prioritize, you can be specific, and you agree future actions accordingly. Ideally, if you're inviting someone to a formal meeting, just have an agenda in there as the items you want to tackle, so that cover or tackle, then at least the person can prepare accordingly. Now, some of you may have heard often used with a little bit of bad language, a feedback sandwich, and it's essentially where positive is given, the main crux of it, the negative in the middle, and the positive at the end. So you've got this sandwich where you're giving actually some negative feedback or some unwanted, possibly, or difficult to give feedback, maybe a better expression, but a feedback sandwich. Now, I don't like the feedback sandwich, and it's rather rude name, but it's the common approach is to give a positive, but then have a negative in the middle and end with a positive. There's a real drawback with this approach. It dilutes the real message. You really want to talk about the thing that's gone wrong or not going right, but you're sandwiching it with things that are really positive. So it's inauthentic, can be very formulaic, because we're all aware that this approach gets adopted so many times. If people are used to this approach, they're going to be anxious, thinking, "I've got the praise. Where's the criticism going to come?" Any genuine recognition is then going to lose its value. It encourages avoidance of direct conversations as well about the real heart of the issue. It's like, "Oh, I don't want to give this bad news, so I'll flower it up either side," and it kind of dilutes the middle piece. And often that end praise is very generic, so it means nothing anyway. If you look at it in terms of maybe a crass example, but when you're in a relationship and you want to leave someone, you don't want to upset them. "Oh, you look lovely tonight, but I think we should call it quits. But it's not you, it's me. You've got a lovely personality." Real mixed messaging being sent. So it's not great, that sandwich type approach. The alternative approach is be clear, direct, and respectful. Positive feedback when deserved, constructive feedback that is clear and specific. Think of the situation, the behavior, and the impact. Use that coaching approach. How did you think it went? What would you do differently next time? Feed forward, like I mentioned earlier. Next time, let's try and do it this way instead, and separate the praise from the development, so you're avoiding those mixed signals. This sandwich approach won't work when it's a serious issue, because people are focused on the positives. "Oh, I got told I was doing some really good work," and they've missed the middle piece. If it's a repetitive issue, it's not really addressing that repetitive concern. And particularly if the person is neurodivergent, they may not pick up on the right signals, and they may think, "I don't understand. I think I'm being praised, but I'm not." So it can be very, very confusing. It's not to say you shouldn't do this feedback sandwich, but it's not something that I am particularly a fan of. But don't ever underestimate the importance of the tone and the psychological safety of the environment you're in. So be respectful and be mindful of how you're delivering your messages. So what happens when there's constructive disagreement? Again, be clear, direct, and respectful. Positive feedback when deserved. Constructive feedback that's clear and specific. So situation, behavior, and impact, just as I referred to on the last slide. So good place for dealing with constructive disagreement is start from a place of agreement. I see where you're coming from. Use the "I, not you" in this circumstance. I'm concerned that we might be underestimating the risks here. Be clear, "I see it differently," or "I don't agree." Um, Back your view with reasoning, because then you're making it constructive. It's not a personal "I don't like your style or your approach." It's a constructive reason for doing it. "We need to do it. I see it differently. I think we need to do it this way because of X, Y, and Z." You're challenging the idea, not the person. So I don't think that solution is going to meet the objective. I do understand your perspective. However, I don't think it's going to work because of X, Y, and Z. Offer an alternative. It demonstrates contribution, not opposition. And again, keep that neutral tone, control pace and volume, avoid loaded responses. So they say, well, obviously that's not going to work, or clearly that makes no sense. Avoid those sort of statements. You want to keep it in a very constructive way. And use curiosity when appropriate. Disagreement can land better as a question. So, how would this work if such and such happened? And once again, as I said before, don't ever underestimate the importance of the tone of your delivery. So, assertiveness when delivering difficult feedback. I've talked about not using the sandwich approach. So, how do we be assertive, deliver feedback, whether that's to our manager or whether it's to our colleagues or our peer group, our subordinates? So, you start with a positive statement to commence. You then talk about when you do A, B, and C, the facts of the matter. When you do this, it makes me feel X, Y, and Z feelings wise. What I would like is this approach instead, the needs. What do you reckon? Can you try with that? And then you're inviting a response. Now, I've talked about this in one of my other sessions as well, but an example that I had with that is I was often being a bit critical without offering solutions in a team meeting or to my team members. I was being very transparent about my thoughts and things. And one of my team members found that that was actually making them feel quite low, and they weren't alone in the team. They came to me and said, Andy, I really appreciate that you're being transparent and giving your point of view, but when you get ultra critical and start picking all the flaws, it makes me feel really demotivated. Do you think you could try and reframe it in a way that is transparent but is a little bit more constructive in your criticism? Do you think you could try a slightly different approach like that? And of course, I was mortified. That's how I came across, but I adopted that that approach going forward. So, additional tips for conversations: respect and acknowledge. Really appreciate your efforts. Set that context. There have been some activities that have caused concerns. Be prepared to discuss and be open. Where there are explanations, there could be a different perspective that comes to light because of that. Define the requirements and offer support but not control. So when it comes to types of conversations you might need to have in the workplace, there may be occasions where you need to influence people. So what are some of the influencing techniques out there? Well, first there's empowerment. You can give others an activity, you've empowered them to do it. So they're adopting that suggestion, that idea, and then they're taking control over it. So planting the direction you wanted to go and then giving it to them to do, you're kind of influencing people into a certain direction. There's interpersonal awareness, genuinely listening and tailoring your approach so that you can influence people in maybe a more effective way than just a one size fits all blanket approach. Bargaining. If you do this, I'll give you a bonus, I'll give you a pay rise, I'll give you a promotion, I'll give you a day off. Great way of influencing people to do things. And it's quite prevalent in the workplace. The better we do, often there are rewards on the back of that in various shapes or forms. Relationship building. In one of my other sessions, I talk about having a vision of the team and good engagement with the team. If you can build good relationship with your stakeholders, with your peer groups, they're more likely to buy into your ideas or at least listen to them, even if they don't wholly accept them. Organizational awareness. Tap up the people that you know, maybe the other side of the fence, that can champion your change. I've worked in unionized environments, and the importance of getting a union rep on side that may be able to influence the members is a real good tactic for getting things over the line as effectively as possible. So if you're going to present something to a panel of leaders, for instance, and you know there's one leader on the team that likes what you're talking about, get them on really on board, so that when you've left the room, they're going to be championing your cause on your behalf, even though you're not present at that point. Have a common vision, set that vision. As mentioned, I talked about some of this in a previous session, but having that common vision, you're all in it together, you all have the same end goal. That's going to influencing people to be effective. Impact. If you look the part, be the part. It's the way people perceive people is very interesting. If you exude confidence and you're able to arouse emotions, we see it in certain political leaders, very good at arousing those emotions, and they influencing people into adopting certain approaches, shall we say. I have seen some people who look the part, but are they actually the part? But they are so convincing in what they say, a lot of people are suckered into thinking, "Oh wow, that's correct," and it might not be. So be mindful that some people that exude that confidence aren't necessarily always right, but hopefully they're in the minority and not the majority. Use logic, probably one of the most common and prevalent ways of influencing people, providing statistics, providing data sets. It's quite a good persuasive way of getting people to buy into what you're selling to someone. Working in an environment of HR and people, I'm always conscious that if you take numbers alone and take it out of context of the culture and the people, you might be missing a trick. So my HR head is always, yeah, the statistics, the numbers are great, but what else is there behind the scenes? So if it is dealing with people, I'd always advocate just looking at the wider context rather than just what's the bottom line here. And the final item, coercion, you might think, oh, that's quite a negative